For Touch Base in Seoul this week, we welcome back a guest who we had on the show over 2 years ago now. In September 2019, we interviewed Mike Kim, the founder of the Korea Legacy Committee, a movement of young people striving to give back to the community by helping the elderly in poverty. We've invited him back in the studio today to get an update on how the committee has been doing, particularly while facing the difficulties thrown up by the COVID-19 pandemic. Mike, it's an absolute pleasure to have you back on the studio with us today.
Thanks for having me back. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's great to see you. It's been over 2 years since we've seen you. How have you been doing?
Good. You know, the past 2 years have been challenging for a lot of people. But in regards to KLC, we've tried to just, get to work, put our heads down, and make sure that we continue to grow the movement and feed as many elderly people as possible in Korea.
Can you briefly introduce to us once again, for our listeners who might not have seen the first interview, what the Korean Legacy Committee is all about?
Absolutely. In a nutshell, the Korea Legacy Committee is a movement. It is a movement of young people dedicated to feeding the elderly of our country. Korea has the highest level of elderly poverty in the world. Right now, it's about 48%. So nearly 1 out of 2 senior citizens who live in Korea live below the poverty line. And so it is our mission every weekend and through the weekdays to feed them and ensure that they have the resources to survive.
And all those involved in your committee, they're young people, students, and young professionals, right?
Absolutely. This was built from the ground up by young people, college students. And so we have a network of young, KLC warriors in a sense, who go out. They're the ones fundraising, they're the ones recruiting folks, and they're the ones going out and feeding. So it's really inspiring.
Right, to get young people involved, helping to tackle this issue of elderly poverty here in Korea, a very pressing and important issue indeed. Mm-hmm. So as you mentioned, when we had you here in September 2019, the committee, it had already been growing rapidly at that point. You had a lot of ambitious plans to tackle the issue, but then the pandemic struck. How did that affect your organization?
You know, when the pandemic first struck in 2020 March, it was pretty difficult. One was the city itself, and actually just the nation, kind of went into lockdown. And so that also meant the places where elderly normally would go to get a meal were closing. They didn't want people to gather. They didn't want people to wait in lines. You know, if we go back 2 years, 2020 March, April was a scary time. And so they shut down this very vital resource. We even got messages that says, don't go out and feed people because it'll create a scene where people wait in line.
Right.
And we made a very hard decision at the time. We sat down with the board and we knew there was a pandemic and we knew it was scary. But we also knew there were people out there that if they didn't have a meal, they would die. And so in April of 2020, our movement and our leaders made a decision. We're going to go out. And we did. And we continue to. So for the past 2 years, we haven't skipped a beat. We go out every weekend. We go out every week. And we're feeding more and more elderly every month.
Still, there must have been logistical challenges. For example, one of the key activities, as you said, is to go out and actively provide free meals to the elderly living in poverty. How do you go about doing that while keeping your volunteers and everyone else safe from COVID?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've limited the number of volunteers. So usually when we have 20 to 30 volunteers come out an event, we now have around 5 to 8. So that's one. Number two, we make sure that all the elderly are served outside. So you'll see that there are lines outside. It's difficult in the winter, but it's outside. We also try to space out everyone by 2 meters or 6 feet. And then also we have safety measures. So all of our volunteers always have to get a temperature check, make sure that they haven't gotten a notice being surrounded by someone that might have had COVID. So we have taken precaution to make sure that our team, as well as the people we're serving, are safe, and we will continue to do that.
Still, you've taken all these measures, but you have scaled down. It still must be quite difficult for you because the pandemic, obviously, that exacerbates the elderly poverty situation as well.
Absolutely. But you know what? One of the things that has really amazed me from our young leaders is we could have slowed down, but in the past 2 years, we've actually grown nationally. You know, 2 weeks ago, I just visited our Daejeon college chapter. This weekend, our Gangneung, Gangwon-do chapter just came to visit me. We've got a chapter in Incheon now. So yes, the pandemic has given us challenges, but that has only doubled down and reinforced the belief from our young leaders that we're going to go out. So we've actually scaled in the past 2 years.
Right, I saw on your website there's an impact report from 2020, and although it highlights a lot of great work that you still managed to do, the numbers showed the challenges you faced. The amount of donations dropped by 50%, the number of meals served dropped by more than 70%, but interestingly, at the same time, the number of volunteers really shot up as well.
It's been amazing. I mean, we actually can't keep up with the demand of the people who want to volunteer. We have to abide by the safety measures, like I just said. But, when we have a volunteer event, we can only take out 5 to 8 folks. But there are probably 40 to 50 folks that want to volunteer with us. So there's interest. But you're right. When it comes to fundraising, we used to have events, parties or charity events to get people to fundraise. We haven't done that in 2 years. So you're right. Fundraising has been very difficult. We're hoping to pick that up. But because of the big hearts of some special donors over the past 2 years, we've been able to continuously purchase the toshiraks and continue our movement.
As you said, there's such a demand for people who want to take part in the committee that you have a waiting list, essentially, right?
Yes. We've got a waiting list, and we really spent a lot of time thinking about how we're going to fix this, because I always say there should never be someone who wants to volunteer and give back to their community and there's not a spot. That means we're not providing that space. And so what I'm actually really excited about this year in 2022 is we're going to make history. We are opening up our very, very own space in Seoul where we will cook our own toshiraks every single day, and we will distribute our KLC toshiraks across the nation. And so that will give our volunteers space and opportunity and a platform for them to come out, and we will be able to handle the load.
Where do you think this interest keeps growing from? As you said, you've been very successful. You've got this waiting list of volunteers who want to take part. What do you think has been the secret to your success?
I think it's because it's been honestly grown from the ground up by young people. It's not a large corporation. It's not a religion that's telling folks to do it. These are young Koreans who want to give back to their communities, and they built it. I honestly think it's because they have a sense of ownership. It is not my movement. It is not, some large, massive organizations that's doing it. It is purely because of young people wanting to do it. No one's getting paid. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work every week. There's a lot of meetings. We have to organize, but I think because they feel ownership and it's their movement that we've continued to grow. And I'm just so proud of our young leaders for that.
So it sounds like you've got some very ambitious plans for this year and ahead then. This space sounds incredible.
Yeah, for the past 6 years, and this is our 7th year operating now, we have always raised money and then purchased the toshiraks. But now we want to be able to save more money, because when we purchase the toshiraks, although it's kind of at a discount, we're still having to give some organization some profit for them to make it. We decided it's time for us to make our own. Let's get the donations ourselves, let's buy the ingredients ourselves, and let's make our own toshirak. We cut out the middlemen. And we then will volunteer our services. It'll be our kitchen, and we will distribute that across to all our partners' locations in Seoul and across Korea.
As you said, you've been active even during the pandemic era. How have the people you've helped responded to the fact that you continue to come out and try your best to help them in this situation?
We went out on Christmas morning. I don't know if you remember, the 25th was really cold. It was really cold.
I think it was snowing in
It was
most
snowing.
parts
It
of
was
the country.
really cold. And we were at Tapgorgon, which is kind of where they congregate. And I thought, today is really cold. It's 9 a.m. They're not going to come out. We had prepared some KLC beanies. And every single person that came out, the 할머니 and 할아버지, kept looking at our volunteers. Usually they take the meal, but they would take the meal and then they would also hold the hand of the young volunteers saying, "Thank you so much." And it was so touching, but also reminding us it doesn't matter if it's cold or it's really hot or you're tired. There are always people that rely on us now. That's what 7 years of a movement is. And so it reinforced to us that we can't give up and that we have to continue to build.
Now, in our last interview, you talked about how there were 4 college chapters. You've already hinted that there's more now. I believe that's 15?
17 now.
17, wow.
17 college chapters. We're going to build 6 more this year. And they're not just in Seoul. Like I said earlier, Daejeon, Incheon, Gangwon-do, we're going to launch Busan the first half of this year. It is a matter of scale, but the great thing is we can build these chapters because there are young leaders all across this country that want to do something. And so our job is to give them the platform for them to continue to serve the country that they love.
You're opening up more chapters, you're continuing with your food drives, but you must have a bigger goal in mind as well. What is your ultimate aim?
The ultimate aim, and I've said this all the time, is if you want to open a college chapter, we actually have to have you go through an 8-week leadership academy. And ultimately, my biggest goal is this. If a young college leader comes through our program, does, a college chapter for 1 or 2 years, but then leaves and then uses their education, the tools that they learn to build their own movement, to fix some problem in Korea, that's my ultimate goal. I think there is a lack of leadership training in Korea. And so I don't expect these young people to be with KLC for 40 years. I'd like that. But
Sure.
There are a lot of challenges we got to face in this country. And so if we can build the next wave of leaders who will be part of, Congress and national positions, that's the ultimate goal of this movement.
Have you seen members of your committee go on and to do bigger and greater things as well outside of KLC?
I will say this. What's really empowered me is when I see these young leaders who are starting their young careers. You got to remember, they're 20, 23 years old. So they're also, just starting their professional lives. But I've seen them leverage the tools and their voice to get the companies that they work for to give money or to give volunteers or resources. And I think that if it weren't for this movement, they wouldn't have built those skills to even challenge their companies to do that. And so that's how we change culture, is these young people going into all these different other companies in Korea, and slowly their voices are growing there. That means the culture and those companies are changing there. And then other young people are saying, I can make a difference here. And so that's the ultimate goal. It's the ripple effect. And I always said, it's going to take a lifetime to do, but I'm dedicated to doing it until I die.
For any listeners out there who are in Korea who want to help out, where do you need to go? Where do you need to go to find out more information?
KoreaLegacy.com. You can volunteer or donate there. So right when you go to our homepage of KoreaLegacy.com, you can either choose to volunteer, and then every month we have about 10, 15 slots. You can just reserve the day that you want, or you can make a donation, which goes 100% towards the toshiraks. None of us have a salary. None of us get paid for what we do. This is an organization where the proceeds go towards feeding the elderly.
Well, it sounds like the committee is going really strong, and that's great to hear, and we wish you all the best moving forward as well. We've been speaking to Mike Kim, the founder of the Korea Legacy Committee. Thank you once again for coming in today.
Thanks so much for having us. Appreciate it.